Good evening, fellow Plexers. I don't think I've done a video like this, and I have to keep it a certain way because I don't want YouTube strikes. And my channel is really a Plex channel. It's not a trash guides channel, even though I discuss that once in a while, mostly from the point of view of the shared media folder you need for Plex in order to achieve atomic moves. Tonight's video goes out to Colin, and I'll try to keep it brief. Colin has a older, I think it's a DS218 Plus Synology NAS. He wants to move his Plex server to another system with JBOD storage through a USB connection. I would encourage him not to leave the Synology ecosystem, or at the very least set up a full Unraid build if he becomes interested in a trash guide setup. So this is not a how-to. It's just going to show you what works under a Synology NAS and how I moved my Plex to a faster NUC powered by Unraid as a Docker host. So Colin, to start off, this is the Synology NAS I started my system on in 2019, a DS1019 Plus NAS. It has the same iGPU in it that your NAS does, only the Celeron processor is a slightly different, better model. But the iGPU is the same. This will do 5 high bit rated HDR HEVC 4K transcodes without breaking a sweat. An additional 1 from 5 screws the whole thing up though. So I have gig internet access. I've got 20 family and friends on. Because of my gig access, this server would still make a capable Plex server for me. So you see, this is set up with 10 drives in it, SHR2 for 2 disk redundancy. There's 5 in the main unit, 5 in the expansion unit. I've got the expansion unit here, and I have 5 12 terabyte and 5 8 terabyte drives in it. This is the data that's backed up from my main NAS. So let's go to the main NAS next. So volume 1 is strictly for my Plex media. I do have a test Plex server installed and a small test Plex media shared folder, but only the Plex media folder gets backed up. I don't really care about the Docker containers getting backed up, but I do back up that configuration to the other NAS too. But the Docker containers here are easy to set up. My Plex containers under Unraid. This is a second volume on the expansion unit, but this main volume is 5 16 terabyte drives in the DX520 Plus and 1 16 terabyte in the expansion unit. Now, in the spring, I'm coming into a little bit of money. I'm going to do an upgrade. The Synology DS, 1825 Plus should be released by then. It's an AMD powered NAS, no hardware acceleration, but I don't need it because Plex server is running on the fast Intel NUC under Unraid. I want to switch to a fully SHR2 configuration instead of this SHR1. And I'll probably buy 5 or 6 22 terabyte Iron Wolf hard drives to start off with. And then once that's fully set up, where everything's moved to this setup, the new setup, I'll recycle these 6 16 terabyte drives with the 12 terabyte drives from my older NAS, and this DS1520 will become my backup NAS, and I'll sell the older DS1018 with probably my 4 terabyte drives and my 8 terabyte drives. So I am deeply invested in the Synology ecosystem. I like Unraid, but you can't protect data like you can under a Synology NAS. I have snapshot protection turned on. I use 2-factor authentication to get into the NAS. I have passwords that take 16 quadrillion years to crack. And even if a hacker got in, the snapshot protection prevents them from encrypting my data. They can't lock me out because I can restore through a snapshot. People have had Unraid NASs encrypted. A lot of people have had QNAP NASs encrypted. So this is my jam. Nobody's getting in, and it's just been a rock solid setup. So that's nothing against QNAP NASs or an Unraid self-built NAS. But this is what I'm doing here. So all those trash guy containers, we can see them running in Container Manager. Prowler is the, well, for Usenet, it's a indexer aggregator and a standalone search engine, but it connects all the indexers for Usenet setup to the individual R services. Now, I only run 2 of them. I do not run Radar for movies. I like to collect them manually. I run Lidar and I run Sonar. It's here someplace, right here. And of course, I run a few other things, but Saab NZBD is the landing zone software. I don't want to say the D word or even the ACQ word. It's where things land. And if done the right way, you end up having atomic moves. And that's what I'll show you next through FileStation. So, this is a shared media folder for my Docker containers. And of course, this is a test Plex install, not my main Plex install. Let me use this media PD. This is my actual Plex media folder. Just naming it Plex confuses some people because Plex was the shared folder name that a package install under DSM-6 created. But I'm under DSM 7.2.2, and the Plex package container creates this media, or this shared folder name. So this confuses people, but I'll explain how to get the atomic moves through one shared media folder. One shared media folder. My personal preference is to use a sort folder for each of Plex's library types, movie libraries, other videos, photo, TV show libraries. But it's not often you're going to have multiple music libraries, so I didn't name this music-libraries, I just named it music to reflect library status. Inside the TV library sort folder, you can have a main movie library, you can have a main kids TV library, you can have a kids TV library, a separate one for DVR if you want, or even an anime. I like this nested structure. Otherwise, all those individual TV show libraries and individual movie libraries would all be at this level. So under the sort folder for movie libraries, here's a 4K test library. Here's a documentary test library. One for DVR, one for kids, one for main. Here's a test one I was playing with. And then the key is to have your landing zone folder. This would have 3 folders inside it: complete, incomplete, and watched. Your files land in the complete subfolder under here. And what creates an atomic move is when the acquisition software brings it into the landing zone folder, it then has to be renamed and moved to the library folder. Well, because all this is taking place in the same shared folder, the rename and move happens instantaneous. Some people are led to set up separate shared folders, like one for the landing zone, one for music libraries, one for TV show libraries, one for movie libraries. Well, those files will then have to be copied from one shared folder to another, and that takes time. And then once they're copied fully, then it gets deleted from the original one. So do this. If you have 2 shared folders on your current Synology NAS, copy a 12 gigabyte movie file from one to the other and just time it, see how long it takes. Erase that new copy you made and then go back to the shared folder it was within, and then right click and move it from one location to another in that one shared folder. that movement will be instantaneous. So an improperly set up trash guides setup, when you're, say you add a show that has 12 seasons and 22 episodes per season, and you're conservative, each episode is only going to be about, oh, I don't know, they're going to be small. They're going to be 480p or 720p versions. Not hard, not large. To have to wait for things to copy from one shared folder to another is just like watching paint dry. But to have atomic moves where the movements are instantaneous, that's super fast. You don't need a fast processor for any of that. And your current Synology NAS can handle this. Doesn't have a lot of drive space in it, so if you get into this, you're going to need more room. So anyway, that's all my containers, and that's a proper setup for atomic moves. And before I show you anything else, let's go into Unraid. Now this is where I'm not using Unraid traditionally. This is the dashboard. These are the containers I have running here. You see I'm running Plex and Channels DVR. FileBot, I don't like the way it works as a network service under the Synology NAS. It works great here. I use FileBot to rename locally, but if I'm out of town for a week or two visiting my son and daughter-in-law and grandkids 900 miles away, I can tunnel back in and use FileBot right on my home network to rename media that's on my home network with the Synology NAS. It's just great. So you see I'm running the 11th gen Intel NUC. It's got this processor in it. And someplace here, it's got this iGPU, a Tiger Lake family. And again, as I just posted on Facebook, the iGPU in this 8th through 10th gen Intel CPUs, all the same. It didn't really matter if you had an i7 or an i3. Hardware accelerated transcoding worked the same way. So under a 8th gen i3 versus a 10th gen i7, library scanning functions and detecting the intros would be a little bit quicker under the i7 than the i3 of the older generation. But your ability to hardware accelerate transcode was all the same. Well, that's true of 11th through 13th gen, which gives the next boost to transcoding. 14th gen is a brand new type of chip that gives another boost from the 11th through 13th gen. So the 11th gen processors is kind of the sweet price. You can probably find a used mini computer with an 11th gen processor in it cheaper, if you're lucky, than what it would cost to buy a brand new 13th gen. But if you've got a huge wallet and you want the absolute best performance, it'd be a 14th gen chip because that has the next generation of iGPUs. So what makes Unraid special is very easy to set up. Everything's point and click. I'm going to update this unassigned devices, which is a plugin to connect to my Synology NAS. I have 3 people streaming off my server right now. Well, let's not show that. Let's do it this way. I have 3 people streaming off my server right now, and they didn't even notice that little update. So, version 7 of Unraid is about to be released. This version requires an extra flash drive in order to stand in for my one storage device. It's not used. You see how much space is free with a 64 gig flash drive. Version 7 eliminates that need. So I need this one flash drive right now in order to be able to start this pool up. Unraid calls it a cache pool, which is a misnomer if you're coming from the world of Synology NASes. We think of cache in a Synology as temporary storage for read or write or both, and when you turn the NAS off, any information is lost. Well, a cache drive is permanent storage in Unraid, and this is where your Docker containers run on. So if I click into it here and click into the app data folder, you'll see my container folders. So here's the Plex container, and at this point, once you get down to this folder, you can actually take an existing server off of Synology NAS, install as a package or a Docker container, and get it easily running under Unraid without any data loss. Now, I know you're running a, I forget the generation, but you're running an Optiplex, and I can't remember if it was a 9th or 10th gen Optiplex. That will run Unraid just like my NUC does. You don't need to replace anything, and I forgot about that when I sent you the link to the Asus 13th gen NUC. Completely forgot about your Optiplex. I love Optiplexes. I tested this whole theory out on a 7th or 8th gen Optiplex, made sure it all worked before I bought my Intel branded NUC. All right, so that's Unraid, and how you set it up. And you see, I just got mounts back to my Synology NAS. There's no Linux terminal to use. There's nothing to look up besides you could follow my guide. I have a playlist on this. You basically point and click and you put your passwords in. So all I did is I created a user called Unraid on my Synology NAS and gave it its own unique password that was 1,000,000 characters long, and I used it to create 2 mounts.
You have a new flash mail.
One mounts to my Plex media share. Remember, that was my main share, media share on the NAS. And then I have a shared folder named channels-dvr-unraid, and that's where my channels DVR records back to. And again, there's nothing to browse here. This is not available on my local network because there is no array that I'm sharing. This is not a storage array, but I can access it through Unraid. I could create a share for this flash drive, but there's no reason to. And if I was using Unraid for regular storage, then you share that on your network. So let's go over the difference here. If you're not sure of Unraid, Synology uses RAID, and they specifically have their hybrid RAID that's more flexible. Basically, it allows you to mix drive sizes when you create the RAID, or upgrade to larger drive sizes if you want to increase storage or add a larger drive to the array. But you need 2 larger drives to take advantage of the space. So the first larger drive is treated as the same size as what's in the array. So that's all just a little bit better than a plain RAID 5. Unraid's even better. But I just like the traditional RAID better, or the hybrid RAID. Unraid, you add as many data drives as you want, and then you can add 1 or 2 parity drives, and it accomplishes the same thing. So all the data drives are like one shared drive, and you can create shared folders on the shared volume, or the volume made up of multiple drives. It's kind of like RAID with a JBOD setup, but they're not really individual drives, they're treated as one. And then to gain parity, you add a drive that's at least as large or larger than your regular disks, and that basically checks all the other information on the remaining drives, so that if you lose one of the drives, it can rebuild it. You don't need the parity drive backed up, because if you lose that, you just add another drive and you run through the parity process again. And you can have 2 parity drives. Now, Unraid would excite me more if you could have 3 parity drives, because back to my Synology NAS, if I want to have up to 15 drives across 2 expansion units, and that was the ultimate intention, well, I would love some type of RAID that offered me 3 disk redundancy. So I can't have that under traditional RAID, Synology hybrid RAID, or Unraid. Unraid's limited to 2 parity drives, and I don't know why. I'm not technical in that aspect of it, but if it could have 3, I might change my whole mindset and have everything in Unraid even though I really like the security of a Synology NAS. And again, I'm not saying this is unsecure with Unraid. I'm just saying a Synology NAS is super secure. And I'm just a Plex user. I'm not an IT guy besides what I've learned for Plex. All right, the last thing I want to show you before some of the trash guide programs is the Docker containers. Dockers are pretty easy to set up on a Synology NAS, and let me jump to this. I use Portainer to set up Plex, and I use Portainer to maintain my containers under the Synology NAS. If I wanted to update Ladara, let's show you that. I'll click it, I'll stop it. Now I've got to wait for it to stop. I'm looking up here. The first time my mouth has stopped in I don't know how long. 21 minutes. So now it's stopped. Then I click the recreate button. I slide the repo image and I recreate. Now that's going to recreate. It'll take about twice as long as it did to stop the container. I'll bring it off screen. And now if I want to update a container here, I simply click force update. Yes, update it. So on the Synology NAS, Container Manager isn't that special. It doesn't really have enough features. Portainer is wonderful and it fills the gap in. Unraid doesn't need anything. You could run Portainer under Unraid, but the Docker setup under Unraid is fabulous. I like that better than a Synology NAS. And we're still waiting for this to update. It's about done. So now the container has successfully recreated and it's running again. So Portainer's great, and you can actually spin up a Plex container pretty easily. I've got tutorial videos on doing that, and also on the Synology NAS. But Portainer is a great tool for Synology NAS to make Docker containers easier to manage. All right, so it's easy to update. It's easy to check. I can check all for updates. We've just had a Plex update 2 or 3 days ago. Everything's up to date. And the containers are just easy to manage. If I click on the container, I can edit it. And I'm just got my paths back to my libraries. Now I've got a path for each type of library because that's how I set my Docker container up under Synology. If I had known more back when I did it, I would have just had a single path to my Plex shared media folder instead of 5 individual paths to each of the sort folders. But I just went with what I had because it made moving my existing container without metadata loss easier. 2 things I want to show you here. You're getting the long tour. Now I put 32 gigs of RAM in this NUC, and that allows me to use 16 of it for RAM transcoding for hardware acceleration. And this simple line is what I do to unlock the iGPU for transcoding under Plex. I don't know how to say it besides it's stupidly easy to set up, and that may be insulting to people who aren't too smart, but it's stupidly easy to set up. The default container from Linux server wants to put the Docker container on the array that doesn't exist. Adding cache in here puts it on the cache drive. It's all pretty easy. And the best part, I have the Synology NAS plugged into a CyberPower UPS. And in the settings of the Synology NAS, it's set to turn off 2 minutes after a power loss event. So it only runs on the battery for a couple minutes and then shuts down automatically. When power is restored, it spins back up. Easy peasy. Well, I can extend that through the NUC protocol to Unraid. So my NUC, like your Optiplex could be, is plugged into the battery of the UPS. And where are we here? Let me open the settings. So you just get your IP address, swap them, and now this extends what the Synology NAS does to the NUC. And if I lose power, this also shuts down 2 minutes once it hits battery. When power is restored, it boots back up. And then probably the only hard thing to do, which I've documented, is because this boots up so much quicker than my Synology NAS, I wanted to delay the mounts. I wanted to make sure the NAS booted up first. So I delayed this mounting procedure here to give the NAS time to boot up. And then I added a little bit more delay to these Docker containers. This 300 is seconds. So this takes about 8 minutes to start serving up Plex media because I really give it some leeway to make sure my Synology NAS is up and serving media. Which means this is such a rock solid setup that I can be out of town and I could lose power once a day for 5 minutes and everything will come back up without any intervention by me. And maybe that's how to end it. It's a rock solid setup, but of course we're not ending it. So, let me show you the landing zone program. And I think I mostly have to be careful of words. So, I'm going to keep this kind of tight. You see I haven't cleared this. But you see what's in the queue here. I want to get rid of it. Purge the completed NZB. And again, this is a Usenet/Indexer setup, which isn't free. I have 2 Usenet service subscriptions for like 40 and 50 bucks each a year. And then I have a whole bunch of indexers that are anywhere from 11 euros to $15 a year. So I look at it as if I was someone with cable TV and I had 3 or 4 connected TVs with boxes, and you might have a monthly cable bill of $300. I spend less than that a year than what some people spend on cable to have this setup. So this is where my news servers go. I think this one was the best when I added this one to it, but now this one does some pretty good work. So I'm not going to say it, but if you look at that number, and if you look at this number, and then you look at this for the month, and this for the month, then this for the week, and this for the week, there's not a lot I have to do manually, even though I collect movies manually. So that's the, if I drew an arrow down and added load to it, or loader, you'd know what I was talking about. I just don't want to say it on YouTube. So then we get to Portainer, or Prowler, sorry. And you know what? Yep, I gotta be careful. So there's one indexer I don't want to show. You're not supposed to talk about one indexer in public. But these are the indexers I have. And you can actually search with this too. But you don't search here, you add things to the star programs or the R programs. So let's start both of them up. And again, I don't use radar. They take a second to open up. And everything is passworded these days, so I've turned the password off for local access. Okay, so these are the series that are monitored. Let's look into something. Oh, I don't know. Let's look at the calendar first. So green means it's already there. There's a key. Red is missing. Orange is on here. Purple is that word I'm not going to say. Green is the final act of that word I'm not going to say. Purple is the act of that word I'm not going to say. So if I advance the calendar, let's use this as an example. Open that series up. You can see that there's previous seasons. Not having this flag means it's unmonitored, which means it won't look for better versions. Just like I've unmonitored some episodes that have already come in, and these are the ones left to come in. So it's just a pretty neat little trick. It's like a little DVR setup, which is exactly what it is. And there's different views for the calendar. You get a forecast view, daily one, a weekly one, an agenda. So I use the weekly one. And then Lidar is very similar. Green means you've got them all. I'm still missing some from here. Actually, you might always miss a few albums because they're just not on Usenet. But that doesn't mean you can't find them and add them to your library yourself. So this works pretty well. And there's also a calendar here. Let me do the month. Or the forecast, let me see. I have a lot of music, so I guess I'm not picking much up. Let's go the other way. See what it has grabbed recently. So I think this is more impressive for a TV show setup than it is a music setup, but works well enough for me. I had a very large established music library, and that helps fill in the gaps. So one more thing I want to show you. I think I got a Chrome app for it. So it lists the setup for all of these individually, and I don't know if I can get to it from this link. There's a setup guide for Synology NAS, Unraid, Docker containers. No, that's not what I'm looking for. All right, I'm on the spot. I can't find it now. But it tells you how to set it up for the different system bases you might have. And that's where it'll talk about atomic moves. And it might talk about it under file and folder structure. So instant moves, also known as atomic moves. You'll find star setup guides on YouTube that don't take into consideration atomic moves, and it makes for an inefficient setup. So we're 33 minutes long. I hope you're not bored, but this is the type of setup some of us have, and some of us just don't worry about seeding requirements because we're under Usenet. But if you think all of this has to be absolutely free, Usenet's not for you, and it just makes for a different configuration. I haven't done that configuration, but I've been around the group for quite a while now, and there's less posts about working on trash guide setup under Usenet, and there's more posts with the tracker setups. Just my opinion on that, and I'm a very opinionated guy. So, thanks for watching, and happy plexing.